Over these many years, it's often been said we have to become divine scientists, divine physicists, and divine alchemists. If we put an interpretation to these three, we could say that science is the art of inquiry or exploration, and physics is taking the formulas, the set formulas of life, and making out of them equations. And then alchemy, the art of bringing together the elements, the chemistries of life, putting them to the fire, and when they are merged, as the alchemist does, putting the vessel aside and letting the elements settle into their new state. And we could say that out of that state always arises aha moments, levels of awareness. So, bearing that in mind, we can then say that according to the great Zen tradition, when someone has a moment of awareness, they go to their Zen master for confirmation of their enlightenment. And it's well documented and chronicled that there are levels of enlightenment according to the Zen tradition. There was a story told whilst on our travels that enables a very important question to be asked. And to answer this question, we have to recognize that all of these three, our divine scientists, our divine physicists, and our divine alchemists, are at work to bring an answer to us. The story that was told with the forerunner of commenting that it's well known by all of us that at certain level of enlightenment, according to what's chronicled about the great masters of the ages, that at a certain level of enlightenment, gifts come, siddhis they're called, extraordinary or seemingly extraordinary powers. And there are many stories of the many masters of the ages who have demonstrated these powers. And there is one such master. In the Sufi tradition, he is called Isa. In the Christian tradition, he is called Jesus. And there is that story of Isa, when, having attained these powers, as has been documented in the great book, turning water into wine, bringing the dead back to life. There was the occasion when Isa was on a pilgrimage, and as he was walking down the road, he came across a young man sitting, weeping, sobbing beside a freshly dug grave. And when Isa approached him, a great wave of pity and compassion flooded his being, and he asked the young man, "Why are you weeping?" The young man replied, "Beside me is the grave of my beloved wife. She was my new bride when she left her body." And with this great compassion and pity, Isa used his power to bring the dead bride back to life. The husband was delighted, overwhelmed and overjoyed with happiness. And Isa went on his way to continue his pilgrimage. And the husband and wife continued with their connubial bliss. One day, when the bride and her husband were sitting to rest under a great tree, the husband fell asleep with his head in the lap of his wife. But as she was sitting there, came riding by on a great stallion a handsome prince. The eyes of the prince met those of the bride, sitting with her husband's head in her lap, and lust and passion arose in both of them. The bride gently took her husband's head and laid it on the ground as she climbed up behind the prince on his stallion, and they rode off. Now when the husband awoke, there was no sign of his bride. He was broken-hearted. He wandered about, asking everyone, had they seen his wife? And finally, in the midst of a town, someone pointed to the gate, the door that led to the palace of the monarch of that place. And when the young husband looked, there was his wife in an intimate embrace with the prince in the garden of the palace. He entered and accosted them and said, "My wife, my bride." And she said, "I've never seen you before in my life." As it happened, Isa had come by, stopping at that place, and entering the garden, he stood beside the prince, the wife, and the husband, and he too inquired of her, and again she denounced her husband, saying, "I've never seen this man before." Recognizing the situation, Isa used his powers to return the young bride to her state beyond life. And in that moment, he had a great realization, a great awareness. And from that moment on, he never again reacted from compassion and pity. So the question that's posed to us, needing our divine scientist, our divine physicist, our divine alchemist, to find the answer. What is the realization that Isa had?
That when he was acting from compassion, he was still coming from himself, and that has consequences.
Absolutely it does. Are you still reacting to the waves that inevitably come to us from the suffering, the pains of those you meet? What is it that is there for us, even when these waves come? The waves of life of everyone who comes into our aegis, into our aura. Using that saying well known of the Buddhists, life is suffering. Everyone in their own way, bearing their burden of pain. Are you still responding to those waves? And if not, what is it that is now present in your life that can no longer use those words, even with the experiences that come moment by moment? The waves of the suffering of the elements of life. This leads us into another sphere of inquiry and exploration. But first, the acknowledgement, the recognition that there can no longer be for us compassion, pity, empathy, love. No longer valid in this place.